just,
Oh, that's the one with the turnaround?
No, that's one by the EDA properties.
Oh, okay.
So this is one, this is two,
or just me?
yeah, that's four. I had to look.
Okay. Okay.
White.
Be Greg coming still, and then we'll be.
Is Greg coming? I think Greg's should be coming. Well,
If you would just give Joe a thumbs up when you're ready to call the meeting.
All right, I was gonna wait just a few minutes. Oh, there he is. There he is, there he is. Thank you, Greg, right on time. Okay. Okay, so tonight we're having our second work session on hearing that we held last week. The also tonight, if you notice, Wally has handed us something which I think probably we should start out with because it seems that we have gotten a letter from the Big Woods Development Company, and they are hereby withdrawing, Big Woods Development Company hereby withdraws its application for buffer modification number 2 to the Legacy of Poquoson Master Plan, which is to be heard by the Commission this evening. This is the only buffer modification request made by our company that involves any area of permitted wetlands. Although the request did not propose to expand any permitted wetland impacts, we believe that withdrawal of the application is appropriate at this time. We respectfully request that the Commission move forward with a recommendation to the City Council on our remaining requests. So we have that tonight. So that would be modification number 2, which I think probably we don't need to
We'll just basically skip over that.
just kind of
in
skip that one
PowerPoint,
because we
yes.
don't really need it. We're not going to be voting on it. Okay, so that would leave us, Wally, do you want to?
Yes,
I was
yes.
thinking I'd let
Absolutely.
you go ahead with which from
Mike's
the
working.
discussions that we had, yeah.
First of all, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. That is good. Okay. Just as a little refresher, the Planning Commission, as Ms. Shriver just mentioned, did conduct public hearings on 6 requests, we're down to 5 now, on September 16th, 2019, and voted to postpone recommendation on all of the requests until October 21st, 2019, which brings us here now. Planning staff has updated the report to provide information requested at the September 16th public hearing and to further clarify the requests. To this end, and you're about to see it, a PowerPoint series of slides is also presented for reference at the work session this evening. Okay, so with no further ado, let me start. This is the master plan approved on 8/24/15. This is no different than the master plan that I showed last month, but it's just kind of get us all centered on what we're looking at. This was what was approved. It was 238 homes, and I can't make out the small print here, but it was 109 townhomes, 11 cottages. Nothing that's being proposed tonight will increase the amount of development past those levels. I would also emphasize that as we move through the site plan processes, it is probable, and it's hard to quantify how many lots, but it's going to be they're going to be very hard pressed to reach the maximum numbers that were given as part of the master plan in 2015. Okay, the current area, just for reference, basically it's wooded, a lot of different properties, and they have acquired, the Big Woods Development has acquired every property with the exception of one, and that one's in progress. And this is a nice arc map that just Mr. O'Connell made this, thank you. And this shows the whole area, shows the different zones that are involved. We have basically R1 down here. We have village community up in this area. This is actually general commercial, which would be purple if not for the shade. And this is research and development, all the blue indication here. And that's interesting because this is actually showing R&D on the map. I thought that was general commercial. Anyway. Hold on a second. Okay, well, we'll try it this way. Here's current site development plan that we have in right now that's being reviewed for phase one. What I would just point out is that two of the buffers, I seem to have lost my power here. Two of the buffers, if I may stray from the microphone, are in the area of the commercial and parking and T turnaround, and those are the only ones shown on that. That is currently under review now, and of course we're looking at that with a sharp eye towards meeting all the regulatory as well as the county ordinances that are in play. Okay, the first application is for a proper amendment, and this is really largely a rehash of just comments that were given last month that are also contained within the staff report. Just reiterating again that the result of the proper amendment, if it's granted, and of course you'll recommend on that tonight, will be to effectively postpone construction of the clubhouse and pool into a future phase of the project by virtue of the fact that it's moving from the 80th, prior to the 80th townhome or single-family residence to prior to the 147th. Just so happens phase one, that's one thing I wanted to point out on that map. Well, now I got to use the manual arrows. As there's 146 townhome and single-family units proposed as part of phase one. Okay, so getting back to my key points here. Depending on the order of site plan and or development plan approvals, this could be a significant amount of time. There is no timeline that tells the Big Woods development legacy, you know, when they start phase two, when they start phase three, or you know, when they begin. They're, as I say, they're in the middle of phase one right now. So there's no guarantee that phase two or any future phase will be built. I believe the applicant spoke to that, their intention to build out the entire proposed development at the last meeting. But if there's any clarification needed, the applicants are here tonight if the Planning Commission should seek any clarification. That's pretty much it for the proper amendment, unless there are any particular questions. If they're not, I'll move on to the rezoning.
Actually, I do have a question, and maybe for you and maybe for the developer. And I apologize, I probably have a number of questions to go through this tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really don't know much about construction. Is there any real specific reason why the clubhouse and the pool have to be built at the same time?
Well, they were presented together, and the proffer, the outline of the proffers lumps them together.
The proffer says it, but is there
Right.
any mechanical reason? In other words, is there any reason, is there any room here for some sort of a negotiation to, you know, maybe not completely require both of them be built at the same time, and maybe one at 80 and one? Is that a possibility?
That's probably
Might settle some of the people's problems.
okay. That's probably a good question for the developers, and it might also be a question of when you get into proffers, you got to be careful because these things have to be voluntarily given. So you know, we may need some guidance from the city attorney on that as well. Okay.
You don't have the authority to direct the profits. The profits come from the developer. You have to consider what's before you as being the profit. city, no capacity to direct what a profit has to happen.
Again, I fully understand that, but is it worthwhile to go back to the developer and say, I'll just be hypothetical, to say, we wouldn't approve this, we might be willing to compromise on something else? I understand what you're saying, no, we can't change the proffers, I got that. But, you know, it seems like this is all or nothing, and I'm not sure that, again, I think we should probably go through all this, and maybe that's more proper for the regular meeting, but it's something that's been bothering me for a while.
I'd be hesitant to direct, in any way, be seen to direct the applicant to make a change to their amendment. And I think you've heard from Mr. Moore, who basically saying the same thing, probably better than I can. You need to go through the chairman at this point.
Right now.
At this point, we're just going to have the work session, then we'll go into the regular meeting.
Go on with this, because actually that would be sort of out of.
Okay, so that's the proffer amendment, okay? The next one is the rezoning amendment, and really what the rezoning amendment is showing is additional architectural renderings other than the one that was presented as part of the master plan approval in 2015. And what I've done, unlike last month, I have actually endeavored to show all the architectural renderings as we go. You'll see this first one here is a composer rear load. So these would be rear loaded. You can see the fronts. The garage would be behind them. And these are the ones that are the front load. So they're loaded directly off the front road. So just, you know, for comparison's sake, those are those two. They've got some others that are a little more, maybe a little more ornate in the front. Here's an example. This is one these are 2 stories, and this one is a hunt design, as I understand it. Some other architectural renderings. These are, obviously, these appear to be front-loaded. The garages are shown in the front there. These are also front-loaded. These are other new architectural renderings, and I'm just kind of going through. This is the previous one. And this one was an H.H. Hunt design that was given as part of the original approval in 2015. As I understand it, not being here in 2015, the intent was to submit some additional renderings, but for whatever reason, they were not considered as part of the original pass-through. The applicant is requesting to change that now in order to provide a wider variety of homes that would be on up for sale, essentially. And as I understand it, these lots are going to be sold to the developer that's going to build these townhomes. Key points for the rezoning amendment. Townhomes that are part of the application will definitely provide more variety or mix of townhome types. It is unclear what that mix would be. There's no indication of where the differing townhome types will be placed within the townhome area. There's not a percentage given. There's no indication of what numbers of what designs would be built within the townhome area. The concern there being that we certainly understand that the developer wants a wider variety to offer. That's not hard to understand at all. We just want to make sure that it's not all going to be 1 or 2 different designs. It's truly going to be a variety. The other points was some of the composer rear load and composer front load lacked some of the features included on H.H. Hunt townhomes submitted and approved on 8/24/15. I think that's pretty obvious from looking at the photos or the models anyway. Additional models presented are closer to the original H.H. Hunt model submitted and approved, although none of them really show the open air porches that are part of the original H.H. Hunt design. So those are some points on the rezoning amendment, and I guess what I'll do there is I will stop there for any rezoning comments among the planning commissioners. Any clarifications?
I have a quick question,
Okay,
and it's actually just a clarification of verbiage
okay,
in the ordinance.
okay.
The word articulated, and I'll use it in the reference, new building facades visible from public and private streets, common open space and common parking areas shall be articulated with windows, balconies, bay windows, or other architectural elements in order to achieve attractive architectural design. So the definition of articulated in that sentence, does that just mean a commonality, or?
Well, it's kind of an open term. It's not specific. But usually when you talk about articulation, you're talking about different type of facades, maybe different levels of facades. Like you'll notice on some of these, one townhouse might stick out, one townhome might stick out a little bit more than the other. So that's what you mean by articulation, or, it could be from building to building, where it's, one building, looks a certain way. It's like in subdivisions, sometimes you go through and every house looks alike. The idea is to get some more articulated massing so that the buildings actually have some differentiation among them. That's about the best I can probably do on the fly, but, yeah. Okay, so that's the rezoning amendment. Now we're moving on to the buffers. What I want to cover first is the mixed-use overlay district. And we didn't cover this at all, really, in the last hearing, and I wanted to cover it here because we didn't really talk about it. The actual development, the development is essentially in this area right here, and you can kind of there is a point to which it comes, and you can kind of see it. Well, actually, it's further down here. Not all of the legacy area is, well, let me back up. The comprehensive plan was amended to include that bottom area right there, several years back. This was done in 2013. All I'm really showing this for is to indicate that they could have applied for waivers in the cases of buffer modification number 2, which has been withdrawn, buffer modification number 3 and number 4, which are up towards the top of the parcel. Talked to the applicants. They reaffirmed again that they wanted to go for a modification because they did want to offer something in return for a lesser buffer. In this case, with modification number 2 disappearing or being withdrawn, you'd have the 5-foot area kept in the area of buffer modification number 4 or number 3, which is right up there at the point, and the other one where the road goes out. And I'll get to those here in just a second, but I just wanted to, really it doesn't change anything, but I just wanted to be complete in showing you the map. Okay, origin of modification requests. As I just said, they could have asked for waivers, but they chose the modification option under 8.2-2 in order to provide some exchange in return for buffer reduction. So when we go to 8.2-2, the last part of the second paragraph of 8.2-2, probably needs to be its own paragraph, allows for additional waivers or modifications of the requirements of a zoning subdivision site plan and sign ordinance subsequent to the approval of the master plan. This is obviously subsequent to the approval of the master plan. And of course, that has to go through the Planning Commission and City Council pursuant to sections 8.2-7 and 8.2-8. I actually did give a handout that includes 8.2-2 and also 8.2-7 and 8.2-8, just for your reference and maybe guiding you into what to look for and as you look at these requests tonight. I think you probably already had those, but I just wanted to make sure you had those again. So 4 modifications were being requested. Now we're down to 3 related to the required 40-foot buffer with rationale for each. And of course, while we're here tonight, is at a public hearing by the Planning Commission, which you did, but you haven't made a recommendation yet, and the City Council is required. Okay, I know this is very small type here, and I've got some bigger type on the ensuing slides, but last time there was a lot of talk about what we did back in 2015 on the York County line and on the City Hall, the last two columns in here. Basically, what we did is we took the 40-foot buffer and replaced it with a 15-foot rear yard only buffer. That's what happened. So, you know, that doesn't have to be wooded. Could be wooded, hadn't even been developed yet, so who knows. But it would be landscaped. So it's a rear yard. We could actually allow accessory structures in that rear yard. So, with that in mind, let's look at buffer 1 first. Again, there's the approved master plan. Kind of let us know what we're looking at. And the wooded area. Okay, buffer modification. Number 1 is right in these areas right here. So those are the areas abutting the property owned by Mr. White. He's got a fancy corporate name for it, but it's owned by Mr. White. And the modification here is to go from 40 feet down to 10 feet. Now, our ordinance calls, it's hard to, and you can see number 1 labeled, this was actually in Mr. Myers' handwriting. You can see that labeled there in that area. Okay. Lineal feet involved in this buffer is approximately, and I'm going to say approximately because I measured it with my scale, I come up with about 2,190 feet. If we kept a 40-foot buffer, that would be 2.1 acres in buffer area. However, our ordinance says that the buffer can be landscaped or naturally wooded. So if the development company chose to take all the trees out of that 40-foot buffer, submitting us a landscape plan, they could do that. Now, what we would look at on the landscape plan is actually, we would see if it complies with the term landscaped. And we don't really define that in our ordinance, but if you look at the common dictionary definition, it includes a combination of lawns, could include some trees, could include some shrubs, could include some flowers for that matter. Or it could be some terrain modification, which, you know, it's pretty much flat here, but in some areas of the state that might be more of a thing. All this is to point out that, yes, they could leave 40-foot of trees. I guess it's conceivable that that's what they would do. But if they chose to take it all away and plant trees, for which we really don't have a prescription on replanting landscaping, you know, even at the rate of 1 tree and 1 shrub per lot affected, you're not going to come up with anywhere close to a buffer that would equal a 10-foot buffer of undisturbed woods. So there's 2 ways of looking at it. And that's really all I want to point out. I kept thinking and thinking about what we talked about last time, and I realized that there were kind of 2 ways to look at it. So, again, I'm not telling you which way, you know, you should look at it, except to go by the ordinance, which says it can be landscaped or naturally wooded. So, and if you do that, you start to realize the ramifications of that. You know, they are not bound to keep that buffer even under the current ordinance. I mean, let me rephrase that. They're bound to keep the buffer, but they're not bound to conserve the trees. How about that?
Wally, the buffer is the distance between one unit to another.
It's the distance between the outer property line. I really wish this pointer was working. But it's the distance between the outer property line, which you kind of see in the middle of that number 2 there. Working. Wonder if I've got another one that might work. Let's see here. No, that was not working either. I'm sorry. But it's the outer boundaries of the project, 40 feet in from there.
What's on the outer boundary?
Well, on the outer boundary, what the applicant is proposing is to leave a 10-foot undisturbed, and it is all naturally wooded now, to preserve that naturally wooded buffer, and include that as part of the recorded lots.
Still, yeah, pardon me, I grew up in a tenement in the South Bronx. So
Oh, no.
I don't know, but the difference between the 40 and the 10, what do you get with the 40 that you don't get with the 10, and what do you get the 10?
Well, I will freely admit that it's possible that if they chose to keep the woods there, you would get 40-foot of naturally wooded buffer. If they chose to take advantage of something that's in our ordinance and to go with a landscaped 40-foot buffer, you might end up with grass and a few trees that would be relatively young, very young, actually, and would take a while to mature to really
No, I
create
understand
a
what you're
kind of
saying
buffer.
there.
I mean, that's an option that they have under the zoning ordinance.
Okay, when you walk out of your property and you go 40 feet,
Yes, sir.
what's at the end of 40 feet?
It should be the property line.
Exactly. So another property.
Yes.
So if you reduce it to 10, when you walk out 10 feet, there's another property. That's what we're
Well,
really talking about.
you'll have a gap probably between the back door and where that 10 feet is.
Okay.
But yes,
Okay,
yes,
gotcha.
yes. You're not necessarily bringing the house closer to the property line, but you're certainly diminishing the amount of possible trees you might have. Now, I don't know, phase 2 and phase 3 are a ways away.
I understand. This is
So I don't
phase-
know
this is
how
phase
they'll
3,
approach
is
that
it
when the
not?
time comes. Right. I'm just pointing out what they could do, okay?
I could just add on to that. The lots that are around the edge of this development, I think, are entirely single-family homes, which do have side and rear setbacks. So it wouldn't be your house, the buffer, then the property line. It would be your house, your backyard, whatever those setbacks are. Then at your property line, between that and the property line of the development, there would be a buffer area of 10 or 40 foot.
But that 10-foot, the 10-foot, if you grant the modification, will actually be part of the property. If it was 40-foot, typically that's going to be under a homeowners association. Okay, sure. Okay, key points for modification number 1. Again, no additional lots over the limit of 238 single-family units, 108, I might have said 109 earlier, I stand corrected, 108 townhome units, and 11 cottages established by approval of the master plan on 8/24/15. As I indicated earlier, they're probably not going to get anywhere close to this limit because of development and design requirements are going to take some of these developable lots away. So this is an attempt to limit the loss of at least 8 lots due to buffer requirements, okay? There are other lots that will be lost for other reasons, but there are 8 lots that they're trying to hold on as a result of, by eliminating, or not eliminating, but modifying the buffer down to 10 feet. So, and really what I've just spent the last 10 or 15 minutes saying, I'm not sure if I said it clear, but if I didn't, it could result in more trees or wooded area being preserved. Because landscaped, if they chose to landscape the 40-foot buffers, again, there'd be a few trees and shrubs, there'd be lawns, but there wouldn't be the equivalent of 10 feet of wooded area, okay? So 10-foot undisturbed area is proposed. So that's the key points for modification number 1. Modification number 2, I guess we can kind of skip, since that's not going to be.
Before we move on,
Yes,
let me ask
absolutely.
you another question, and I
Sure.
apologize. But this sort of
No.
applies to all 3 of these modifications now that's real. Keep talking about the master plan on 8/24/15.
Yes.
In that master plan, where were the buffers, where were the edges on that master plan?
Buffers aren't shown on the master plan.
They're not shown.
They're not shown.
Okay,
They're not shown.
thanks, sir.
I get your confusion, but they were not shown.
No, I understand that, we're looking at making changes in the master plan.
Sure.
In the master plan, I just couldn't figure that out.
Right. One reason I showed that Phase 1 master plan is that you'll notice we did impose a 40-foot buffer in there. And I'll get to that slide again, but I'll point that out. Buffer number 2, they've withdrawn buffer number 2. This is the one that would have entailed an access to the EDA properties. So at this point, I'll go to modification number 3. Modification number 3 is the area next to the Tudor property that affects the parking lot and and one of the 2 commercial buildings that are shown on the master plan, which, let me see here. Kingdom for a master plan, let's see here. Well, you could, again, my pointer's no good, but it's that upper commercial area and parking lot sort of behind it, to the right. This buffer would go from 40 feet down to 5 feet. I would like to point out that, as you can see from their copy of the master plan and the actual master plan, that's where they planned on putting this all along. I can't really answer the question as to why a modification wasn't applied for given at that time. I think maybe just, there's some sort of misunderstanding. I'm not sure what it was. Anyway, they're applying for it now. The reality is, and I mean, the lineal feet involved is 321. You got a 0.29 acre buffer that would be there naturally, plus a 0.04 that would be there with a 5-foot buffer. This is the site plan I wanted to talk about. I wanted to point out that none of this buffer, aside from, and we'll talk about the 2 turnaround, but none of the other buffer is going to be affected by any of these requests. Okay? So,
Have we ever heard from or contacted the owners of this Tudor property?
I still haven't heard from Mr. Tudor. We've tried to reach out to him. We've not heard from him yet.
It seemed to me that.
But he did get an
Nice to
adjoining
hear from
property
them.
notice.
Or they may not be local, may not know. I have no idea.
Well, I know.
I mean, if they were to come back and say, hey, that's no problem, we don't mind, I think it makes it pretty easy.
Well, the only thing I would say about that is that Mr. Tudor did get, or the Tudor family, the owner did get an adjoining property notice. They were notified legally.
Wally, my question on what constitutes the perimeter of the property at this point? Not the townhomes going into the commercial area. Why isn't the perimeter considered the perimeter of the Tudor property?
Well, the perimeter, if you look at what they've got right now, the Tudor property is pretty closely impinged upon by the commercial building and the parking. It always has been. It was shown that way on the master plan. What was not done in 2015 was an acknowledgement that the buffer needed to be modified to account for what was shown. See if I've got master plan somewhere here. Well, that's close enough. But I mean, you can see that they had talked about parking and commercial area even back at the time of 2015. It was when we started reviewing Phase 1 that we realized that we needed to go ahead and incorporate this buffer modification, in order for us to really be able to move on and get Phase 1 done. But again, we haven't really, we haven't changed the overall idea, which was to, put really 2 commercial buildings looking very much the same on either side of Legacy Boulevard leading back to the fountain. This bullet point 2, I think, is wrong. I think it abuts RD zone property, but that is, it's research and development. It's one of our more commercial zones. This is a attempt to limit the loss of commercial building and parking lot for the same. Commercial element of the project is the principal part that makes the project mixed use, and we have been beaten up. I won't say beaten up, that's the wrong term. We have been asked repeatedly about what makes this project mixed use. Well, what makes this project mixed use is the incorporation of some commercial as well as some apartment, some townhome, some single family. The commercial is a key component of what makes this mixed use. I talked about the aesthetics. The only way to eliminate space for parking would be to provide for relocation of spaces, which does not appear to be feasible, not when you consider that the other parking areas for the apartments. Any relocation would obviously necessitate a reworking of the Phase 1 plans that are under review and would further jeopardize the profitability of the entire project. And what I mean by that, I know that can be construed to see, well, you know, you're trying to make sure the developer makes a profit. The bottom line is, we've got this area that if it's going to be developed, we need to preserve it in some way, shape, or form to where it can be profitable for the developer to do this. And I'm not saying we should sacrifice everything to make that happen, but this seems to be a fairly small request when you consider everything else that's going on the property. Of course, the Planning Commission is free to disagree. Okay, modification number 4. This is going to be the T turnaround area, and I tried to approximate where that is. On this PowerPoint, it's shown better on the buffer modification request sheet. And that area that's circled as number 4 there. Can everybody see that number 4? Okay, good. I don't know how I'd point that out. It's pretty high. If you take the amount of the T, it's probably going to be between 90 and 100 feet, but I used 100 feet for the purposes of this table. A 40-foot buffer in that area gives you 4,000 square feet. They're wanting to go down to 5 only in that area, which would leave them, they would go from 0.09 acres in buffer area in that 100-foot area down to 0.01. So they would eliminate quite a bit of that. Again, just to point out, on the master plan, you may have noticed that this turnaround is shown in this area. Well, what we did is when we had Site 1, or Phase 1, we employed the 40-foot buffer, which is a requirement of our ordinance unless it's waived or modified. They have to have a turnaround in that area because these lots only have access on this road. If they had access on another road like occurs further up, they wouldn't have to have a T turnaround. But they have to do that for safety purposes to provide those townhomes. Now, they have stated that if they don't get this modification, they'll lose 1 or 2 townhomes. That would probably be these 2 in here somewhere. I'm guessing, pretty educated guess though, based upon the layout of the other homes. So that's what they're looking to do here, is they're looking to build the T turnaround in the same place that they envisioned building it as part of the master plan.
Again, I'm going to ask, I'm sorry I keep doing this.
Fine.
Is there some code or law that requires that turnaround?
Yes, it does, because the homes, let me go back. The homes in that area, there's 2 homes that only have access on this one road. And anytime you have access on a road, unless you have access to another road, you have to have a turnaround to provide for safe movement of emergency vehicles in the event of a fire or some other type of emergency. That is a code that we became aware of when we were reviewing the Phase 1 site plans. That was brought up chiefly by...
I know it's not universally applied throughout Poquoson.
Well, it may not be, but we're applying it here. I mean,
Okay,
I don't know where it's been
asked.
applied and where it hasn't been applied, but I'm
The
just
reason
telling
I
you.
ask is whether it was a nice to have or a requirement to have, because
Oh, it's a requirement. It's a requirement.
I guess have a hard time why it's a requirement, but I understand what you're telling me. I'm not arguing with you,
Okay,
but I have a hard time with that.
okay.
I mean, it's only 4 houses deep.
It's not very deep, to be sure, but that is a requirement, yes.
So if we're looking at highest and best use, obviously the master plan, I know I'm going back and making adjustments, but I'm just curious why the whole parcel wasn't made commercial. Front of the whole development. Suggestions coming through the comp plan survey of businesses in the area.
I understand what you're saying. That's probably a question best asked for the developer. All that I can really say from my end is that when this was first put forward, the idea was to switch your commercial on both sides of this road and have, again, it's a fairly limited commercial area. But, as for why there wasn't a bigger area, I'm sure there were market variables in play that the developer looked at, and, maybe they can clarify that. I can't really answer that question for you, I guess.
So do we know the configuration of the L shape? That, office space, or is it story, or
This is going to be commercial office space, and it's all one story.
one story?
Yes.
I know a gas station was one of the areas that, residents had asked for, and it appears the gas station may not need the amount of parking that we're looking at for office space. A way idea.
Yeah, that's a two-door, it's kind of hard. Parking takes up a lot of that area, actually.
In comment to your point, I can just mention that we've been in conversations with another developer on an unrelated project, and one of the things he's told us is that when looking to lend out money for creating commercial real estate, lenders really, really value having frontage on a major road. That is one of the major things they look for when selling commercial property, because it is not that marketable otherwise if it was off of a main road and deeper inside of another residential development. And so that is probably the reason why commercial is concentrated on Victory Boulevard and immediately adjacent to it.
Yeah, the developer, Mr. O'Connell references, is having a real hard time with his commercial space for that reason. Okay, key points, probably repeating myself here a little bit, but again, can't stress it enough, no additional lots over the limit of 238 single-family units, 108 townhome units, and 11 cottages. We're not exceeding what they were allowed on the master plan. It is the attempt, as I mentioned before, to limit the loss of 1 to 2 townhome lots due to the T turnaround location. The 40-foot required buffer that was added as part of Phase 1 will be maintained elsewhere along the east side of Phase 1. So we're only talking about that 100 feet of area there that we're looking to, for the modification. Again, as I intimated before, in the Phase 1 plans, the location of Street A has remained with no turnaround in order to account for the 40-foot buffer. The 40-foot T turnaround is required. Therefore, the granting of the modification would allow for the T turnaround in basically the same area as depicted on the original master plan approved on 8/24/15. If they don't get this modification, they'll lose 1 to 2 townhome lots, is what it comes down to. And I believe that's all I've got on my slides.
Karen, can I ask a question? And
Sure.
Karen, I don't know if it would be you or Karen, I've kind of asked this with you again. Our last meeting, Mr. Weston, I thought had a really good point about if there is a T turnaround, is there any requirements for it to slope away from Oxford Run?
No requirements specifically, but that's a good suggestion. And
That's something that, I guess, that could be incorporated, or that's something that we can't dictate as probably as the in here, but something that would definitely affect my, my decision for sure is what grade it was or was sloped away.
In other words, if it was sloped to kind of go up a little bit and the water would go back towards the development, yeah.
I was just certainly thinking if it's sloped very much away from oxyfront, you lose whatever advantage you get from the T for being able to use it. You gotta climb a hill to try to turn around. I just don't understand the T. It's not gonna get you out of there, because you can't go left. And I don't understand what the safety requirement is, because it's not gonna let you escape anything. I didn't write the code. It's certainly of no advantage to school buses, because they're not gonna go down there, they're gonna stop at the corner.
Unless it's a public street down there. But yes, I get your point. I get your point.
Wally, could we revisit that clubhouse and pool once again?
Sure we
Based
can.
on what Mr. Travis mentioned, where,
Let's go all the way
I
back.
know
Sorry
you
to
weren't
give
here
you
in
a brain freeze here, but
2015, but I guess, where did it come to pass that the townhouse and pool was built at the completion of phase one?
well, they listed at the 80th, prior to the 80th, which is in phase one. And that is, actually, it's in their covenant and restrictions or their homeowner documents that are actually attached to their original approval back in 2015, and are also mirrored on the outline of proffers that were submitted that look very much, if not almost identical, to what you see in the homeowners and the deed and covenant restrictions that were submitted in 2015.
Yeah, and your last bullet on that chart is disconcerting.
Which,
There is no guarantee that phase two or any future phase will be